My name's Nick Lewis of Nick Lewis Communications. I'm a marketer who focuses on online marketing and social media. And today I'm very privileged to be joined by Alan B. Breton, who is, I think, one of the country's leading experts on Hootsuite and is very informed about social media and online marketing as a whole. Both Alan and myself recently wrote articles on the same topic, which was in response to an article about whether social media managers are still needed, which was written by Ryan Holmes, who is the CEO of Hootsuite. Alan and I came to slightly different conclusions, even though I don't think we're a million miles apart. And the articles can be read on our respective blogs, the links of which we will ensure pops up on screen on the final video version of this recording. So, Alan, when I read your article comes in two parts, and I think I would mind taking the second part of your article first, because I think one thing which I took away from your article is when we talk about social media managers, we sort of end up talking about them being in the singular. For those who haven't read the Ryan Holmes article yet, he's really talking about how social media and its ubiquity means that it's going to be quickly devolved to independent actors within an organization and a company, therefore rendering a social media manager role almost redundant. But it seems interesting that the conversation's always framed about talking about the social media manager as just one individual, rather than one team, than a team of social media managers. And I was just wondering if you could sort of respond on that and just sort of give your take on how you would view a social media operation being organized, the hierarchy of it, if there is a hierarchy at all.
Yeah, I think I read most of Ryan's stuff, and he's also a LinkedIn influencer as well. So if you follow Ryan on LinkedIn, you'll get all of his blog posts and the other third-party publications that he is able to participate in. But in this particular post about how social media managers are dead, or they're a dying breed or whatnot, it's always been that philosophy for me since the very beginning, was that you can't do it for someone else if you're really trying to grasp the true concept of social media. And that is almost in a modern world analogizing to a telephone answering service or a virtual office, where you are acting in that space, but you're not actually in that space. You're outsourcing that communication. And so for smaller companies, in part one of my response, I talked about how there's no reason why they should be outsourcing, because it's not, on a small scale, it's not such a big deal. So they should do it themselves. But then on a larger basis, and I'm talking about big SMEs, blue chips, government organizations, or public and third sector, they have to do it themselves. But in agreement with Ryan's post, I think, more people are becoming technologically adept to handling social, but I still don't think you should be outsourcing that particular job role to another party. I think it should be embedded into traditional communication tools with people. And that's what I referenced in part two of that blog post, was that if you're contacting, say, for example, BT on Twitter, you want to make sure the person answering on Twitter is from BT and is probably in the correct department for you when you're calling through or you're tweeting through. It's just like a menu that you get when you call on a telephone line, and you get automated options. Social could be segmented that much for bigger companies that you only need to conversate with a particular account or profile based on the offering or the service provided, and then that should be handled internally by that department.
I agree. I mean, I think a good analogy almost is if you think about call centres for some services in the UK. I know I hardly ever do it now due to the internet, but when you used to call up national rail inquiries, you would often get someone based in India, and their use of English was fine. I've got no complaint about that, but they just literally did not have a sense of the physical geography of the UK. I remember once trying to get train times from Paddington to Carmarthen in West Wales, and then they told me the train journey was going to take 12 hours, and then I quickly figured out that they were sending me to Carnarvon in North Wales.
Yeah.
So I think you're right there. I mean, you've got to sort of ensure that the person who is managing the feed, whether they're in-house or out of house, has that inbuilt knowledge and is suitably briefed. I mean, with the delegation of social media duties within an organisation, how much training do you think is actually required, or how much oversight is actually required in terms of how people actually broadcast on social networks?
Well, I think the question of how much training does someone need will be very specific on their job role and their remit on social. I've helped a couple of local councils in Scotland and Wales set up Hootsuite dashboards. And in some instances, one or two of the users only had 2 or 3 streams to monitor because it was that specific of a job function. And then in those 2 or 3 streams, they only had maybe 1 or 2 inquiries a day. So it was hyper local and hyper job specific social responsibilities they had. So the training was very simple. I think that the most training that's ever involved is in the creation of the platform and the infrastructure, and then the super admins, because they almost have to have an IT background in some instances to manage it all properly as far as the technical aspect. But no, I think just a couple of hours on social. It's about conversation. It's about informing people with the right information, the right tone and word usage. And if you have to point them to a website or a web page for further information or sign-ups or complaint or data capture or whatever, then that's just using a keyboard to type.
Yeah.
So you are just conversating.
I mean, I used to work for a local council in London, and it's interesting to hear your insights into that. And one thing which I remember working for the local council was they were very keen on controlling the messaging coming out of the comms department. They're very much trying to ensure that the council was on message, partly because historically that council had quite a bad reputation in the 70s and the 80s, and they were very sort of apprehensive of any story or messaging sort of getting out of hand or misconstrued. You kind of think about the political sensitivities, which series like The Thick of It cover, and you can sort of try and extrapolate from that. When it comes to actually doing outreach rather than responding, how do you think sort of most people away from, say, a marketing or comms role should actually engage with other people who may be interested in an organization's services, products, or just general well-being?
Are you asking that question on like a micro-sized business or a larger organization? Or
I think in this case a larger business, because obviously in a micro business things are a lot more controllable, and literally you can have people the other side of the office sort of being able to refer back to a superior quite or someone in a seniority quite quickly. But the kind of organization sizes like we're talking about, you mentioned councils, for example, you're talking of hundreds of people. So I just like your take on that, really.
Yeah, I think larger organizations, and in this particular instance, public sector, they already have an audience offline, and that's the physical people and the land that they might own and the buildings and the roads they build. And if you even just create profiles on any of the social properties, you'll immediately get an audience because of your, not fame or notoriety, but just because of the organization that you are. To reach out to people or to try and grow your audience, that is more about listening to the web and listening on Facebook and on Twitter and blog posts and things about what people are talking about, so that in real time you can either offer assistance if it's monitoring floods during a flood season where there's multiple rivers in the area, and people on Twitter talking about the river bank is just busted, where you can send response units there like in a category 1 scenario. Or you just listen to people asking questions about their rubbish collection, or where they can go to get this public service. Then you're almost being proactive in saying, hey, we're here to help, and we're listening to what you have to say.
I think that creates a lot of goodwill as well. I mean, the fact that organisations are being seen to be as proactive rather than reactive. I think
Yeah,
always, as long as it's done in the right manner, of course. But I mean, I think it's quite good if someone is sounding off, say on Twitter, about a service which isn't being delivered. If a council representative manages to pick up and say, "Awfully sorry to hear about these troubles. Could you give us a call or give us some more information?"
hmm
I know when I was living in Swansea, I had some issues with parking outside the block of flats I was living in at the time, and I complained to the council via Twitter, and they actually were very, very quick in their response, which is
yeah.
heartening. And this is about 3 years ago, so it's obviously the way things are going in terms of that sort of micro communication when it comes to service provision. Um, in
Yeah.
terms of crafting a company's larger message or brand, if we kind of work up that sort of hierarchy, um, if a social media manager's role, if we take the Ryan Holmes model, is going to be diminished, who's going to be responsible for kind of crafting, sort of say, a company or an organization's narrative? And how's that going to be sort of instilled if everyone has been sort of empowered, as it were, through kind of devolved social media operation?
Well, I truly believe that we live in a social world now, and I think I've blogged about that in the past, where everything about what we do, whether it's work, play, or rest, is socially motivated with the way we connect with our friends on Facebook and how we share our
Yeah,
lives, and how our big companies like, for example, like Hootsuite, they want the people in their organization to talk about their brand, to talk about how great it is to work there, to share their sense of community. So yeah, I think it's because everyone should be using it within your organization for lots of different things. Um, I think the management of voice will be down to particular departments and how they operate. It will also be the voice of the brand in general. Hootsuite as a brand is quite quirky, or maybe quirky is not the right phrase, but they're quite forward thinking. But then you might have a very conservative brand or
exactly.
a public office that has to
Yeah,
then create policy around the types of communications that they will send out. If they do offer Q&A or support, is it like the views and opinions expressed here are not bound by any laws or are not medically certified? If it's something about a flu vaccination or something like that.
yeah,
So yeah, the bigger orgs, they would certainly have to create a brand and a tone that they are going to stick to. But if they have multiple offerings through their own service, then they probably need to segment that message as well, so
yeah.
that each channel is really clear on what message they're sharing, but also who the target market is, because then you can amend the vocabulary depending on who you're speaking with. B2B conversations with acronyms, we can throw those back and forth, but if you're talking to a new client that doesn't know anything about it, you have to speak in layman's terms. So maybe it's a combination of all of that.
I mean, going on about sort of larger organisations and sort of certain areas of sensitivity, I think sort of the larger the organisation, and depending on the sector, the more sensitive things could possibly become. For example, I used to work as a communications manager for a medical device manufacturer, and everything that that manufacturer produces in terms of marketing material has to abide by quite stringent regulation. And I think in the latest iteration of the medical device directory, they do include social under that remit,
Mm.
which is really problematic because if you think about it, say something like Twitter, you've only got 140 characters.
Yeah.
So how so you can obviously direct people to links, but how do you emphasize the disclaimers? Say, I mean, obviously you can work things into the backdrop and the bio and other things, but in terms of if the message was taken in isolation, if the tweet was taken in isolation, there's almost no way that you can actually sort of cover some of the sensitivities which a large organisation is expected to deliver according to the regulatory body. So I think there's quite a lot of challenges there because it does rely, I think it goes back to your argument actually, that you do need someone fully informed about the sector in which they are broadcasting about, so they can avoid some pitfalls, say a third-party marketer might not necessarily pick up on. But I mean, the way I'm approaching this is really about some more sort of, control and oversight. Because say a tweet goes out from a medical device manufacturer or pharmaceutical company which doesn't abide by the regulations or doesn't make clear or clarify a claim it is making, that could result in a fine of thousands and thousands of pounds. So, I mean, I think where I was going in my blog is, yes, you can empower people, and yes, training needs to be given, but ultimately, who takes that responsibility for the social voice of a company like a medical device manufacturer or pharmaceutical company?
Well, again, I think there are compliance issues with every sector, particularly in financial services. It's very difficult for those people to engage en masse socially without fear of some kind of implication. But yeah, I think if you just adapt, traditional communication policies that are industry standards or national standards or government legislation that fall within that, then again, I don't feel the need to have someone there to push the buttons on that communication if the culture of the business is that they're social and that a vast majority of their workforce have social skills now, because we're all using these products more and more and more. And I think the title or the knowledge of social media savvy, I think will diminish itself. I'm actually writing a blog as we speak today. I hopefully publish it today.
Brilliant.
And it's called Digital Skills, and it's how perhaps as a foreign language we need to start empowering students with coding and programming skills. Because in the world of computer science and technology and the web, the language of the internet is code and programming. It's not French or German or Italian. And so I think in 10 years' time, that might be kind of a normality, and then everyone in the company understands technology, so it's just giving the authority to conversate to the correct person in that organization or in that department.
I mean, do you also think actually there'll probably be a need for classes or some kind of education provision on how to actually interact with people on social networks beyond the technical side of things? I mean, we know names of various high-profile court cases and other things where social media has either been misused or something which has been said in jest has come back to haunt someone in quite a significant way. But if people are more technically savvy anyway, in terms of how you tweet or how you post onto Facebook or how you upload a JPEG to Facebook, isn't there greater onus actually on the sort of the marketing side of it, as it were? I mean, I'm trying to think of a better phrase of marketing, but in terms of the sensitivity of publishing in a public forum, I mean, would you say that's got a greater precedent over coding, or do you think they're on a par?
I mean, I think having a skill of coding and programming is something unique in itself. We're talking more about the conversational side of it right now, and the technical ability to do that well. Big companies themselves, they always train from within normally, unless it's like if you take a call center, for example. Yes, you might have an outside party come in and give you some customer service training, but the actual usage of the internal operating system is going to be done by somebody who already works there, who's been there for 5 years. That every time they have a new intake of staff, they're the one that do the training, and that creates culture. And in that culture, they talk to you about how to use the technology, whether it be Facebook or Twitter or Hootsuite or whatever, and then B, it's the culture of how you use it and the best tips of how to use it. And then the culture of how you guys communicate with each other and customers through role play and training will then become just a natural part of your job role. And in that instance, I think people like us with our skill sets will not be needed in that context anymore, because it will just be widely available. But there might be people like us who create technologies or platforms that then have to do a training scenario, but that would be almost bespoke stuff, and that would be very governmental types of integration, and then it's not just Nick or Alan giving that
Sure.
education. Teams of people.
And also, I suppose, I mean, the argument to go is if we're living up to the claims that we make about ourselves, we will be keeping abreast with the next generation of social network or social media technology, which is coming along. I mean, yes, when Ryan Holmes writes about everyone is getting more equipped with social media today and the basic principles of it, he's right. But we're talking about the larger social networks which have been widely adopted, your Facebooks, Twitter,
Yeah.
and to a certain extent LinkedIn. But given the speed and rate of evolution when it comes to online marketing and online interaction, there's going to be something new in 2 years' time, and there's something else in 4 years' time. And the very nature of the platform is always changing. I mean, what I tend to find is when I blog about something, within 4 weeks, it's almost redundant. I mean, I did a blog about Facebook EdgeRank about 2 months ago. And then I discovered within 2-3 weeks it'd been modified yet again. So my blog had already been sort of relegated to history.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there will always be a need for people like, I think, you and me to sort of keep an eye on the next development and the changes, because I think when you are embedded in an organization, even in a social media manager type role within an organization, you don't necessarily always have the time or the luxury to sort of to keep up to date with every single change or development on every single major social network or the emergence of new social networks. And of course, it's a matter of sorting out the wheat from the chaff as well, because for every successful new social network, I'm sure there's about 10 which haven't taken off for whatever reason. So if there's always going to be this onward progressive march of technology, the social media manager is going to sort of survive in one form or another, isn't he or she?
Well, I'm agreeing with everything that you just said. I'm just not agreeing with the title of the person, because they wouldn't be a social media manager. And I'll give you my own business and my own consultancy as an example. I call myself a social media scientist because I am that person who gets up and reads lots of blogs every day and goes to tech conferences and social media conferences and participates on lots of different social networks. And so I'm always learning new information or new techniques, or just staying up to date with new developments in those platforms, so that I can share those with other clients, so that it's a simple topping up of the integration rather than a rescale or restructure. But I don't think they're still social media managers. Those will be maybe a social media consultant's a too broad stroke of description. But I mean, I call myself a scientist because I am experimenting all the time, predominantly on mainstream platforms because of the reach and the scope.
Yeah.
But those people will still exist. I mean, it's a communication tool, Nick. So you've got to go back to the very beginning of time and how we communicated with people. And once television came in and the telephone, then outside influencers were then able to say, hey, you can use it in this way to conversate and broadcast in this way.
Yeah.
And then everything's just kind of grown from there. So yeah, there will always be room for people like you described. I just don't think they'll be called social media managers, because that person won't exist.
Because I'm right in saying that I don't think you actually manage any feeds for third parties yourself. Am I right in thinking that? Or
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. My entire consultancy, or my offering as a professional, is just to offer larger insights and specialist information on particular platforms. So yes, I probably am the most informed person on Hootsuite in the UK.
Yeah.
I'm quite confident about that. And then on a social thought leadership, I think I do possess some pretty decent insights into some innovative applications of social networks.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I just meet with clients on a weekly, fortnightly, monthly basis, give them new developments and updates, and consult with them on their traditional marketing and try to integrate it into social. So I don't actually do anything for anyone.
I mean, for the record, I mean, I've actually been on one of Alan's Hootsuite training courses last year, and it was absolutely superb. So for anyone who's looking to sort of get skilled with Hootsuite, and we'll talk a bit about that with Allan in a moment, I'd hardly recommend him. I mean, I come from a slightly different angle, where I actually, aside from training people on the very basics of social networks and social media behavior, I do also manage feeds on behalf of individuals and companies. But really, I take the view of it's not completely outsourced to me, it's more of a partnership, where I actually am a kind of resource they can buy in to augment what they want to do. Because I think when we go to the other end of the spectrum, we talked about your large council bodies and other public sector organisations. When you go to the other end of the spectrum and you're dealing with either like a sole trader or a very small limited company of 1 or 2 people, I think people underestimate the time it actually takes to maintain a good social network presence, especially if it's got multiple social network presences. And I think it can be done. And as you said, I think when people do it well and do it themselves, it's great. But I think for a very small organisation, I think it's hard for one individual to maintain more than 2 social networks adequately, above and beyond what they need to do for their business otherwise, whether it's delivering their services or manufacturing their products and managing their books and everything else. I think it's the kind of nature of what you have to share on social media as well. Aside from engaging with people, I think the big issue is, are you actually sharing content of value or of use to your intended readership or intended customer base? And when I look around, I find that so many companies, just as a default mode, kind of just go into broadcast mode and just go on about themselves, which I think is the biggest turn off anyone can have, really, when it comes to engagement. And I think it always goes back to engagement. So that's just for the benefit of people watching this recording, just how Allan and I differ a little bit in our services. But on that note, I mean, Allan, can you sort of tell us a bit about what you do? I mean, you've already touched on the fact that you can kind of consult organisations, but you also do various training sessions. So if someone was to get in touch with you, what would you be able to offer them?
Yeah, I mean, I offer different types of services, from just a simple telephone or face-to-face chat up to a certain amount of hours for a short period of time, up to a monthly retainer where I am part of your marketing and communication strategy and sit on board meetings or something similar, or I consult with bigger brands, PR companies, events companies, and they white label my services. They take my ideas, which I'm quite happy about, and they use them for their clients under their branding and their umbrella. And I also do the training and workshops. Those tend to be, at the moment, they tend to be quite niche around Hootsuite. Because I do feel that you already know about Twitter and Facebook now, and if you don't, there are people out there that will give you that type of training. But I want to kind of stay on the more innovative aspects of social workshops. So Hootsuite for me is one of the most important, just because of its offering, and I offer that at different levels, intermediate, beginning, and advanced. And sometimes the strategy workshops that I run as well are quite interesting, because how you use social will be completely different to your next door neighbor or the business across the street, because your offering or the reason for using it will be different. So you have to have a unique strategy for that as well.
I mean, one size doesn't fit all when it comes to social media engagement. I mean, that's for sure.
No, okay. Not at all. Not at all.
Well, thank you very much, Allan, for your time. Allan's contact details will be appearing at the end of this video, along with mine. And we hope that you have all found the conversation of use and of interest. And if you've got a question for Allan or for myself, please don't hesitate to get in touch. Thank you for watching.